Coming up on Choppers Politics.
It's tempting to go somewhere where you don't have to battle a tiny faction of your own membership. That would be a nice idea, but how do I square Brexit? How do I square immigration? There are issues that I can't really imagine agreeing with the Tories on. I mean, I'm a Labour person. I shouldn't be having to feel like this.
Hello and welcome to Choppers Politics. I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's Associate Editor. Now, it's easy, given the past month, to think that rows about sparkling wine at work and what is or isn't a party is all that Westminster's focus on at the moment. But that, of course, isn't the case. So this week, I wanted to kick off the podcast with a slightly different conversation. Now, recently, Labour MP Rosie Duffield, she represents Canterbury, tweeted that she was considering her future in the party very carefully after a lack of support for her against what she called obsessive harassment online. It's obviously a sensitive subject for Rosie, but I'm so glad that after some thought, she agreed to join me in the Red Lion pub to discuss social media, whether she would advise young people to become MPs, given her experiences, and indeed her future in the Labour Party. Rosie Duffield, Labour MP for Canterbury, welcome to Choppers Politics. Great to have you in the pub.
It's very nice to be here.
Not too bad, is it?
Bit of a grim day, but it's nice to be not in Parliament.
Yes. How are you doing?
Okay, thank you. It hasn't been a fun couple of weeks,
no.
But you know all about that.
Yeah, well, let's look into that, because you tweeted at the end of January, didn't you, that you've been the target of obsessive harassment by ex and current Labour members who are obsessed by your private life. What can you say about that?
I think I just reached the end of my tether at that particular point, because it's the same group of individuals who are on a completely different faction or wing of the party to me, and haven't really...
Corbynistas.
Yeah. I haven't really got over that or forgiven me for not being him or not obviously supporting him, and for talking about anti-Semitism problems in the party. And, you know, it's lovely to get a lot of support on some of the social media sites that I've seen where people are saying it's about my views on feminism and things, but that is not what is going on here at the moment.
Because you, of course, won Canterbury from the Tories the first time in a century in 2017, so you're one of the heroes of that Corbyn election, weren't you, I suppose, for them, and
Yeah.
They didn't like your politics.
No, I think that's it. I mean, even when I was selected to stand in the 2017 election, there were rumours by certain... I mean, we're talking a tiny group, but it's very toxic. People saying that I'd duped the last candidate out of the seat. I'd been duplicitous. I'd sort of got, which complete rubbish. We have a very transparent way of applying for a seat, and you just literally fill in forms online. The previous candidate had private conversations with me about not wanting to stand, so I did it with his blessing. I think I was probably the only person who lived in the area who applied. You know, usually you get dozens of people applying for each parliamentary seat, but nobody wanted Canterbury. It was unwinnable. So I think 4 of us applied or something, you know. And
all this started with a rumour you were moving, or you were moving with your partner to Wales.
Yeah. I mean, I've read some rubbish about me, but I think the disturbing thing about that was the discussion about where a female MP might be living, you know, given that we're constantly talking about security in this place, and, you know, I have to tell the local police where I'm going to be almost all the time, and they're really brilliant. And then the fact that, you know, you have this one nugget of private thing in your personal life. Why would I live in a different country when I'm... You know, I know that there are plenty of MPs that don't live in their constituency for millions of different complicated reasons.
But working there, essentially.
Yeah, he has been working in Wales, and we were looking at property in Wales, and whether or not we decided to buy something there is nothing to do with me spending time in my constituency. And, you know, it's just the fact that it was weaponised by this particular group of people, just as Labour MPs are coming up to this whole reselection process that we have to go through every now and again. And the spooky thing about it is that the people that write about it had clearly been taking screenshots of my partner's personal Instagram and things accounts for quite some months. So sort of storing this up. I mean, tweets and things that he deleted relating to his jobs, months ago. And I find that really creepy. It's really bizarre, the whole thing.
I can see how upset it's making you talking about it. Are you getting any backing up from Labour about this? I mean, you put your tweet out, didn't you, saying, I'm considering my future in the party. What was the response to that?
I think they're a bit bemused, actually, if I'm honest. Keir was very nice. Keir phoned me up. But I don't think anyone really knows what to do. And we talk about these kind of issues. And, Jess Phillips was on Daily Politics last week, the week before, and she read out an abusive tweet she got. And it's almost, I feel like we have to keep reminding people that happens. It doesn't feel as though there's anyone who can do anything or make it go away. And that sounds like a ridiculously simplistic approach. We've got the online harms bill going through soon, but we just, we're tired. We get home at kind of sometimes the early hours, as you know, and you see that stuff and you just think, just someone make it go away. And I guess their idea is that I just give up and I just go away. But, I'm human and I don't want my family reading that stuff. Yeah, but also how much longer can you carry on where, you asked if I'd got support from the party, but there is no obvious support. I asked for this to be investigated, but as far as I know, I don't know if it has. I don't know. It makes you feel very strange and vulnerable.
You're feeling quite isolated now, aren't you?
Yeah, actually.
That's not nice.
No. I think when we all are, to a certain extent, we're all responsible for our own constituencies, and obviously I have no colleagues. I'm completely out there on my own in Kent in terms of the Labour Party.
Geographically?
Yeah, and we don't really see the Labour Party in Kent. It's just me. So, that was already a thing. I'm not part of the Labour Party sort of networks particularly. I wasn't in any clique. Some people have joined the party at 12, stood in several seats or practised quite a lot of times, and I just sort of arrived and didn't know any of this. Political parties can be incredibly nepotistic, and I'm not in the in crowd in that sense. So you do think, well, where's the support? I've got some great friends and colleagues, but as a party, I haven't really received any. It's not like you get trained for this job. Parliament have been brilliant. The parliamentary security teams.
Lindsay Hoyle made some comments, didn't she? I think.
Yeah, Lindsay's been fantastic. He's just a really nice chap, and he always looks out for particularly women MPs, seeing if their security is up to date and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But he's limited as well. This is a party issue.
Is it a woman issue? Is it a Labour Party and women MPs, or is it across the board?
I think women get it a lot worse. I don't know, men get it as well. I mean, my friend Neil Coyle, I've seen him get into quite a lot of spats on Twitter because he's the wrong faction again. And the issue is we're not really telling the truth about the makeup of the Labour Party. It is two parties, and it's still two parties. We've got the Corbynista wing, and we've got the more centrists. And it's very lovely that Keir wants to unite everyone and wants to kind of get rid of people that are difficult and problematic, but it hasn't happened yet. And those people are digging down all the time. And, we still have momentum, very sort of active in certain areas. And it is very difficult. I mean, there are some colleagues whose politics are very different to the leader, And
is that why he won't take on your issues with these people who are critical of you?
He's got a very difficult position, hasn't he? He's pledged to unite the party and to be, support both sides or both wings. But personally, I don't see how that is possible. That means promoting people from a particular faction, keeping in with the unions, and all of that is important. But at some point, over some issues, I think you have to come off the fence. And this party is divided into two. Certainly at local level, women are still finding it very difficult to go to local meetings.
Well, women generally?
Quite a lot of women MPs, yeah. And it would be really nice to feel as though instead of a steady trickle of expulsions, which has been happening in the last year or two, it'd be nice to know if there was a strategy, if meetings had to be, a bit more friendly, if the social media had a sort of strategy, rather than attacking or marginalising the MP. I mean, don't forget, this has been, I arrived in 2017 and we've gone through the whole anti-Semitism thing and the whole Corbyn years. It feels to me as though this is just a continuation. It's not just a new thing. And from where I sit, on my own in Kent, I don't see a huge difference, actually, if I'm honest.
It is shocking what you're saying and upsetting. What would you recommend young people to be MPs at this point?
I see quite a few schools. We're just returning to schools being able to come and visit us, and it's brilliant. And they're really enthusiastic and excited about politics. You do have to warn them that it's not always lovely. I'm not a snowflake, I've been through some tough things in my life.
Yeah, you have.
And
well, you spoke so bravely about domestic abuse in the House of Parliament, which moved so many people watching it.
Thank you. Sometimes these things, when it's relentless, and you just think, why am I doing this? And it's not... I wouldn't tell young people not to do it, but I would say you need to be really protected and you need to be sure of what you're doing. You need to really pay attention to what's happening in politics. Do you want that? I don't know.
Is Keir Starmer being a coward about this?
I don't know. I suppose it depends how you define leadership. We're all leaders in our own team, in our own staff teams and in our own constituencies. And I think... personally, leadership requires a slightly no-nonsense approach sometimes, and it's great trying to accommodate everyone. But when everyone means people that are actively trying to bring down one of your MPs or a few of your MPs, I think you probably need to be sending out a stronger message that they don't do so in your name. And when Jeremy Corbyn was interviewed about my local party, they had a motion of no censure because I was talking about anti-Semitism. They wanted to basically shut me up. Jeremy was repeatedly asked if he supported me or if he would make a statement supporting me, and he said he didn't get involved at local level and didn't, make statements about local constituency parties. I don't feel there's a huge amount of difference. At the moment.
It seemed cowardly to me, by the way.
I'm sure there are lots of people advising him on strategy and what would be the right thing and not the right thing. And, for example, issuing a statement supporting me, I was told would be shining more light on the issue and making it a story. But sadly, the story that I've seen in social media and in articles is, why isn't Keir supporting it? So it's a lose-lose situation in that sense, isn't it? And I mean, what can he do? He can't come down to my area and personally remove these tiny people, this tiny group.
He might speak out in your favour. He might urge prominent people on Twitter not to retweet abuse at you.
I mean, that would be something, I guess.
You didn't attend the Labour Party conference last year, did you?
No.
Now, that's because you were worried about your safety.
Yeah, again, though.
You made remarks about...
Yeah.
Why can't individuals with a cervix should be called women? So you got into this culture war debate there.
Yeah, and I was, just in a couple of discussions with security and other people about going and about, basically ridiculously, I decided not to go because it was Keir's first big conference speech, and I thought if there's trouble or aggression there, that's going to be the story. If I'm jeered or whatever, followed around, I didn't want that to be the story. So quietly, I made a decision to stay away and told a couple of people, and then that got leaked into a big story about that's why I wasn't going. So that did become the story then, which is just quite embarrassing at the time, really.
Why is it embarrassing if you're not going?
I guess because I didn't want the attention.
For them, not for you.
Well, I didn't want the attention on me. I really didn't. I thought here's Keir's chance. He's going to make a speech. He's going to, set out our plans for policies and all of that stuff, and it was overshadowed, and that wasn't my intention at all. But it just sort of happened, didn't it, unfortunately?
Will you go this year?
I don't know, it depends. I love Liverpool, so I've got friends in Liverpool. That would be quite nice. Yeah.
You're not the only one. Caroline Noakes doesn't go to the Tory party conference.
Yeah, I think lots of people stay away.
And she says that the culture is appalling in the bars and the rest of it.
Yeah.
And she's chairman of the Women's Equality Committee, so you're not alone in this.
No. When we talk about it cross-party, I was at a meeting yesterday which Maria Miller chairs, which is the All Party Group for Women in Parliament, and nearly every time we meet, it's like a therapy session. We just offload how depressing it all is, but also
it shouldn't be this
there
way,
are positive things as well. No, it shouldn't, but it is.
You asked to meet Keir Starmer last September after you didn't go to the conference. Did he meet you about this?
He met me a few days before conference in the end, actually, yeah. And obviously he's been super busy and, I don't know what it involves leading a party.
But for many, the way you're being treated is almost, it almost summarises the change that many people want to see in the Labour Party, and the fact that you're not being listened to, and this is going on for months now, and you're feeling hounded, just feels a failure of leadership by him to many.
I don't know. I mean, I think Kent is a bit of an outlier, and the party has lots of policies that are clearly geared towards getting red wall seats back. So in that sense, I feel that I'm not someone who is involved in, there are policies on immigration, I suspect, that wouldn't necessarily suit the seat in Kent where the immigrants actually arrive. And there are lots of issues that I feel like I could be in discussions about, but I'm not. Brexit, for example, my seat is Remain essential. Yeah, it's not
compared
a red wall
to the
seat.
The neighbouring seats are not.
Yeah, and I think we're quite unusual, but it's a county with nearly 2 million people in it, and if we're going to win the next election, if we have any chance, we've got to win more seats.
Well, there's so much I think Labour could learn from you winning that seat in 17, but
I've never once been asked how I won or
which is
what
fascinating
I did.
because those are the seats that Keir Starmer's got to win. If he can't win in Scotland,
yeah, Scotland and Kent.
Scotland's
two extremes,
he's got to know what's your secret. What's the elixir of winning you drank?
But there are reasons that Kent was different, and my seat was different to other Kent seats. There are lots of things that we could talk about, but I've never been asked in 5 years. So
you did tweet, didn't you, in January that you're considering your future in the party very carefully. And that was obviously 2 weeks ago. Where have you got to on those thoughts?
I think it's sort of a journey, isn't it? And I feel it was a bit of a cry for some sort of help, really. I mean, that sounds really feeble, but it was just a question of what do I have to do to get some kind of action or some sort of support, rather than people sitting around. It's usually, no offence, it's usually men sitting around and saying, what can we do to support you? And it's kind of galling when you've won a seat that's never been won before, and then your majority goes up 10 times despite the worst electoral defeat in, 70 odd years or whatever.
2 years later in 2019.
Yeah, it's kind of galling to be told, to be asked, what can we do to help you campaign? And like, really? That's kind of not really a problem I've had.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's something, funnily enough, I can do. There are other things I'd like support on. I don't know.
What are your options then? I mean, you could, would you, let's ask you a question, would you leave the Labour Party, be an independent to make the point?
I don't know. I mean, I guess that is an option for everyone, but everyone knows that independent MPs don't win. I think I'm quite good as a constituency MP, and my team are fantastic. I don't want to not be an MP. I love my job, but I do need some more support from the party quite soon.
Would you jump ship to the Tory party?
I think the problem with doing that is you let down the people that have elected you for particular reasons, and so many colleagues, quite senior colleagues on that side, have been incredibly supportive. But
on the Tory side, they understand it, and they've
been really nice, and they don't have actually. They have factions as well, but they don't tear each other apart. They don't hate each other inside the party in the way that we do in some of our branches and things. They don't have to battle that all of the time, and it's tempting to go somewhere where you don't have to battle a tiny faction of your own membership. That would be a nice idea, but how do I square Brexit? How do I square immigration? There are issues that I can't really imagine agreeing with the Tories on. So
Lib Dems?
I don't know. I mean, they've asked me before in the past.
Have they?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm a Labour person. I shouldn't be having to feel like this. And if a woman who was a single parent on benefits, who is supposed to be the Labour voter and Labour target, doesn't feel supported, then, I have been questioning how I persuade other people like me that Labour will support them. I mean, I'm being completely honest.
I know you are.
I do need to feel more supported soon by the party, I think.
And then what, if you don't get supported?
I don't know. I'm not sure yet. I'm not going to rush into anything. But perhaps they don't care. Perhaps they don't mind about, perhaps the red wall is such a target that this weird little seat in Kent isn't seen as,
it should be a building block for the party in the south of England.
I thought so. I genuinely thought that when I got here 5 years ago, it was the start of building up support in my area, the southwest, the southeast. I really thought that. I thought we could. It was a great sign that we were cutting through, and I don't know now. I'm not sure.
What would you say to the Rosie Duffield who was elected in 2017 now?
I would have warned myself that every single aspect of my life would be scrutinised. I didn't realise that. I didn't realise that my children would be reading stuff about my love life. And okay, that goes with the territory of winning a seat like mine, I suppose, but I had no chance of winning, so I didn't prepare myself for that at all. And my local paper has dedicated quite a lot of column inches to my private life, who I'm dating, that kind of thing. And I didn't have a clue that would happen. And there are worse things out there. There are people really suffering. I'm not trying to get everyone to play a tiny violin, but I wish I'd known that was going to happen. I would have been a bit more careful, maybe a bit more private. I'm quite an open person, and perhaps I would have been a bit more cautious. I don't know.
Do you think is any blame attached to you on this, in the sense that you made the points about women and trans issues?
Yeah, I could have been quiet.
It was definitely a red rag to part of the party.
Yeah, and I don't do politics in the sense that I say what I think is the most popular thing. I tell the truth about what I really believe, and I also try and talk about things that we're not necessarily talking about. There are thousands of women in the party who've contacted me. On one day last year I got 350 plus bunches of flowers, and I had to get my team to help me deliver a load to local care homes and things. There are women in the party that feel not listened to on this. I mean, not just in the Labour Party, but I felt that I had to say we need to debate this issue. And there are obviously the leadership and others who would rather I just shut up about it. But that's not my style, really.
No, it's not.
So yes, of course I brought it on myself in that sense, but it's not very healthy if there are subjects that we're supposed to completely avoid, because I think it looks cowardly. And those things, colleagues will say we should be debating much more important, bigger things. But this is a thing. When you're talking about women's sport and women's participation in all kinds of areas, I think it needs debating. I think we need to talk about it honestly, actually.
Well, Rosie Duffield, thanks for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. You've got your mug, and I wish you all the best. And do come on again.
Thank you very much. I will. Thanks.
Thank you.
Rosie Duffield there, with what I thought was a moving account of life as an MP when your friends aren't there to look after you. Coming up, we'll be talking to a Conservative Party donor about whether Boris Johnson is doing enough to stay on as leader. Right after this.
I'm Giles, part of the audio team here at the Telegraph, and I want to let you know about a new podcast series we've been working on. It's called Eyewitnessed History and brings to life moments the world changed, told by the people who were there.
It was like a beautiful summer's day.
Join the Telegraph's top journalists as they take you inside the day they witnessed history.
And then I just heard this enormous... I was in New York on 9/11.
Search for Eyewitnessed History wherever you're listening to this.
And if you like the sound of that podcast, this week's episode of Eyewitness History features me, on what it was like being one of the team of Telegraph journalists who broke the MP's expenses scandal. So please do check it out. Now, back to Boris Johnson's current battles with his own MPs, a perennial topic on this show. Now this week, yet another former Tory Prime Minister made their feelings known. John Major accused Boris Johnson of coming up with brazen excuses over the so-called parties in Downing Street. But will that trickle through to the Conservative Party's purse, given that an election could be as little as 18 months to 2 years away? Now, Johnny Leavesley, a businessman and Tory donor, is chairman of the Midlands Industrial Council. That's the biggest Tory donor group. And he joined me in Telegraph Towers to discuss just that. Johnny Leavesley, welcome to Choppers Politics.
Hi, thank you.
It's great to have you on, and you're here in Telegraph Towers. What is the Midlands Industrial Council?
The Midlands Industrial Council, MIC, was set up after the Second World War in about 46-47 to promote and support free enterprise. And it just so happens that for most of the period, for most of the funds we have raised, we have given to the Conservative Party.
Have you ever given money to the Labour Party?
No, we haven't.
So it's just generally
no,
flows.
We've occasionally given money to sympathetic think tanks and the occasional charitable cause, but it's overwhelmingly for the Conservative Party.
The reason why it matters, donors are part of the fabric of this country in terms of giving money to political parties, and you do it because the state shouldn't and can't do it.
Yes, I firmly believe that there shouldn't be state funding of political parties, because I think it embeds in the political parties a strength which they otherwise shouldn't have.
Haven't earned.
Yeah, I used to be one of the party treasurers of the Midlands. And
of the Tory party?
Yes, yeah, and I started off in 2004 at the tail end of Ian Duncan Smith's leadership. And I well remember during that 18-month period or so, there was something like only 30 men and companies, and they were all men, who gave over £5,000. And they were very close to not being able to pay to keep the lights on. It so happens, if you believe in a free market in ideas and in political parties, that sometimes parties will die and be replaced by other movements, and that's good for democracy. If you had state funding of political parties based upon votes at the last election, which can be 5 years apart, I think that embeds things too much to the detriment of democracy. So it's a good thing. I tell donors who are wavering about whether they should donate or not that it's in fact it's quite a noble thing to donate to political parties.
And Labour has its support from unions and membership.
Yes, and if you get to a point, and maybe we'll talk about this later, if you get to a point where Labour no longer becomes relevant to the trade union movement and relevant to working people, then maybe that funding should dry up. And that would be the end of the Labour Party.
Can you say the scale of the donations which the MIC, the Midlands Industrial Council, gives to the Tory party?
It varies.
What's the run rate per year?
It varies on the electoral cycle. So when it comes up to a general election, obviously we'll pull our fingers out and give an awful lot. And we've got some...
It's millions of pounds?
Yes, it's millions of pounds. And we haven't donated recently, but the pandemic has stopped many things. We're going to up our peacetime giving, as we call it, and mainly direct them towards marginal seats, and that will be in the region of hundreds of thousands of pounds rather than millions of pounds.
And that's starting shortly, but you're not giving it to the Tory party itself. Now, is that part of the problem with the leadership?
We do occasionally. Some of your listeners are going to think that we're a body that donates in its own name. We don't. We adhere to the law on political donations, of course, and if your listeners are interested, they could spend a happy half hour on the Electoral Commission website and look up who the donors are. They will be down there as individuals, as companies. They won't be identified as being members of the MIC as such, because we simply act on one level as a coordinating body and as a forum for them to meet senior politicians.
Is there a degree of frustration at the moment with the leadership of the Conservative Party?
I think popularity amongst donors towards the party, it's very similar to how things are in the opinion polls. There are some people who are frustrated and some people who are still very supportive. So it's a mix of opinions.
You've written an article for the Telegraph, which is on the website today and will be linked to in the show notes to this episode, saying get a grip, Boris, or go.
Yes.
Do you want to expand on that?
Yes. I think he deserves another chance, actually. I think the prize is keeping Boris and him delivering upon his early promises. And that prize is over the horizon, and it is proving to working people in red wall seats and elsewhere that the Conservative Party can raise living standards, can spread opportunity and prosperity, and thereby render the offering that Labour offers to them obsolete. If we become the natural home for the working man and woman, and we do it through rising living standards, or levelling up as you call it, then that also renders the trade union movement irrelevant or obsolete. And I think that's
that was a promise of 2019, wasn't it?
That is the promise of it. And the simple fact is that Boris has taken us further to that goal than any other Conservative politician before. And for that alone, he deserves a second chance. If he doesn't deliver on it, then matters are so serious enough. Then, I think we can change our mind and demand he goes. But I think he does deserve a second chance.
We're in this strange position at the moment, aren't we, where we have Labour criticising the government for tax increases and the Tory government pushing them through. And in your article there, you talk about the increase in national insurance coming forward in April, which will add hundreds of thousands of pounds to some families' budgets, and the increase of the corporation tax rate to 26%. You call them regressive and disappointing.
Yes.
Do you want some action on that? I mean, you talk about if the party is going towards these red wall seats, then perhaps that's what they need to do, which is increase taxes and almost disregard their historical base.
Yes. I think they are regressive, and I think they're the wrong thing to do at the moment. Naturally, I come from a position of business, and so NIC increases affect employed people and employers, and corporation tax is also, I think, the wrong thing to do at this stage. And the reason I think it's the wrong thing to do is that we need more than ever GDP to grow and a growing economy, because that pays for everything else that government delivers, and it pays for a rising living standard.
I should say that you have a business which employs a lot of people.
A few hundred people, and we have some large businesses as well. So yes, I think it's the wrong thing to do at this stage of the economy, because it's just too weak. We need to kickstart the economy. It needs a raft of measures, but raising business taxes is not the thing to do at this stage.
Are donors turning off the taps to the Tory party because of these concerns?
Now, some will be continuing their donations. I made my donation to the centre last week, and I did it deliberately because the party's going through some rough times, and I know.
How much did you give?
Oh yes, I suppose I can tell you, because it will be on the Electoral Commission website. I gave £25,000. Yeah. Some certainly are waiting to see what happens. As I say, it does reflect opinion polls. But we are friends of the party in bad weather as well as good weather. There's no doubt about that, yeah. I mean, I've heard earlier this week, there was one donor whom I didn't know who said that he was suspending his donations. You always get donors who are saying things like that. But just as much you get donors who quietly in the background don't say such things and carry on donating.
But if the government was a company you were going to buy in your business, I mean, you'd be content with the way it's being run? Or would it look? It looks a bit chaotic from where we sit in Westminster.
Yeah, OK. I mentioned earlier that I first became a treasurer in Ian Duncan Smith's day, when the party nearly died. During that time, I remember, it was the one time that I agreed with every policy the Conservative Party was proposing, even though we were in opposition. Ever since then and before, there's always been something I've disagreed with. There's always something to disagree with. But you take it as a whole and you move forward. And that's why I wanted to speak about what the prize is over the horizon. A part of the reason we won a landslide was because Boris is a Heineken politician and he reaches parts that other middle-aged men in suits do not reach. But part of it was because Corbyn and the offering of the Labour Party was so terrible. But if we, if we want free enterprise or capitalism to prosper in this country, and the good reason is that it will deliver all the public services that we want, then we need a Conservative government, because at the moment the left is not centre-left or centrist enough to be a safe environment, and I firmly believe that. So yes, you can get some donors who are upset about certain policies. I can be upset, and I'll make it known, as I have done, that I don't like some aspects of the tax policy, and don't take me for granted, because then the donations turn off or diminish slightly. But broadly, yes.
Has the party lost sight? Has the party lost sight with what conservatism is?
Well, it always has this battle over the soul of the Conservative Party. You know, is it a hard right Thatcherite entity which goes for a low tax environment? Is it more sympathetic towards a larger state model of one nation Toryism? And it's a continual debate. That's because if it's split into one or the other, it would be too small. It needs to be a broad-based coalition of the centre-right and the right to be able to form power.
And the best leader for that is Boris Johnson?
The best leader for that at the moment is Boris Johnson, because he won such a resounding electoral victory. We have other tests coming up, as we know, the elections in May. I would just advise them to think carefully about what they do and to watch things carefully.
If not Boris Johnson, who?
Oh, I've been asked this before, and I always say Andy Street, there at the West Midlands. But he can't stand because he's not on an MP. I always say that because I did raise the money for him for his mayoral elections. And actually, it's reasonably serious to say this, actually, because he is a middle-aged white chap in a suit, a bit like me, and he has the same effect as Boris, believe it or not, in that he's a Heineken politician. I've seen him in areas of Birmingham where Tories do not normally reach successfully, being immensely popular, actually. And I think the red wall seats that fell in the Black Country and such like actually were as much to do with Andy Street's efforts as they were with Boris Johnson. So yeah, I'll go with Andy Street for being Prime Minister at the moment. But I fully appreciate he can't be a candidate. There we are.
Do you think he'll be the Tory leader at the next election, Boris Johnson?
Hey, he could be.
Will he be?
Well, it's foolish to predict what's going to happen in the future, but he certainly could be. Didn't he announce that he wanted 10 years as premier when he was elected, and with an 80-seat majority, that's certainly possible. If he turns things around, there's no reason why he shouldn't.
Johnny Leavesley, thank you for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. It'd be great to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Johnny's written a punchy piece on why Boris Johnson should get a grip of his government, or else risk losing his job, for today's Telegraph. And of course, if you want to read that, and if you're not already a Telegraph subscriber, please go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper for your first month's access to the website completely free of charge. Now, listeners, next week is not only parliamentary recess, but also, for parts of the country, half-term. And if you have children, you may be frantically trying to decide how to entertain them for the next 7 days. How about a trip to a National Trust property? In proof that nothing, and I mean nothing, is apolitical, the charity has itself come under some fire over the past few years, particularly over its approach to the links between some of its properties and the UK's past, involving colonialism and slavery. And this week, MPs and peers from all parties established a new All Party Parliamentary Group to, in their words, apply scrutiny to this national institution. The group's chairman is the Conservative MP for South West Wiltshire, Andrew Murrison. And I started by asking Andrew why the National Trust needed an APPG.
Well, the National Trust was set up over 100 years ago by Parliament, by statute, and it's been reviewed periodically since then. And it requires parliamentary scrutiny because it's very big, it's got a significant turnover, a huge membership. It's the custodian of some of our greatest national treasures, a big landlord, it's big business. And it has been attended by a certain degree of controversy in recent time. And that's why I had my debate on the subject in 2020 and why I think parliamentarians are interested in it at this point. So it seemed appropriate to me that we should have an all-party parliamentary group to gather that opinion from across the political spectrum in the Commons and in the Lords and do what we can to scrutinise the Trust and perhaps make some helpful suggestions along the way.
It is one of the largest landowners in the UK. It owns 620,000 acres, 780 miles of coastline. It has over 500 historic houses, castles, archaeological sites and industrial monuments. It's a significant part of the DNA of this country, isn't it?
Well, I grew up with the National Trust. I was dragged around National Trust properties as a child by my parents, and I've always loved it. And I appreciate the beautiful places that it looks after. I think those places are restorative, particularly in these troubled times, and they act as a sort of solace to the soul. And that's what people want. I don't think they really want messages particularly. They just want to go there and be quiet very often and to appreciate beautiful things.
That's what it comes down to with the National Trust, doesn't it? Because there's a bit row about rainbow-coloured lanyards at a property in Norfolk, which volunteers were asked to wear, and some volunteers were unhappy about that, and that was a nod to an LGBT-themed exhibition or time in the Trust. And then, of course, there's this big issue, this big row about this linking nearly 100 properties to the historic links in this country between slavery and colonialism. Is your worry about them that these are controversial areas which the Trust shouldn't be getting involved with? Or are they just trying to reflect modern Britain and concerns in modern Britain?
Well, the Trust has got a vast membership. It's also got a very large team of volunteers. It relies on volunteers and their goodwill. I think it's true to say that many of those volunteers just want to show people round. They don't want particularly to be the vehicles for particular worldviews or small p political messages. That's certainly the case. It's come across very clearly, I think, in recent times. But the purpose of my group is to look at the Trust in all its dimensions. And there's a lot going on at the moment in terms of land management, environmental management, issues around the apparent commercialisation of the Trust, its apparent desire to close smaller sites and facilities in others. I've seen it in my own constituency with an attempt to commercialise one of the sites in my patch. And I don't think it's necessary because the membership is so big and the balance book is so good. You know, we need to maximise access to sites, not just the big ones like Stourhead, but all of them.
How many members do you have of the new All Party Parliamentary Group?
Well, actually, I was rather pleased on Tuesday when I set this up, because All Party Parliamentary Groups, you'll know, Chris, can be a bit mixed. Some of them barely have a pulse, to be honest, and others are very well populated. And I was delighted on Tuesday when I had 30 people turn up for this, parliamentarians, Commons Lords, right across the political spectrum. And I think it's indicative of the interest that my colleagues have in this subject matter.
In terms of the subjects you'll be looking at, have you got a programme of work you've worked out yet, or is that to be agreed with the members?
I am seeking an early meeting with the National Trust to discuss where we should be going. I think there is no shortage of things that we should be looking at, because the National Trust, as we've discussed already, is so vast.
The Trust said they sadly were not informed about your plans for the APPG. Well, why was that?
Well, I think it's important. This isn't an organisation simply to be a cheerleader for the Trust. The point about this is it's populated by parliamentarians. Parliamentarians are there to do scrutiny. That is what we do. The Trust needs to have that scrutiny about what it's doing, its direction, particularly its strategic direction. And I therefore am very happy to work with the Trust, and I'm grateful for any support and facilitation they can give. But it does need to be on the understanding that we are independent and we're going to do what parliamentarians do, and that's apply scrutiny to an organisation that is vast, has a huge membership, and needs ultimately to be accountable. And
the Charity Commission can't do that, or its own Board of Trustees. You need the external parliamentary scrutiny.
Well, I think the point about Parliament is the Trust was set up by statute. That's the important thing. We have a responsibility, clearly we do. And we all, as MPs, represent large numbers of people who are associated one way or the other with the Trust. I have Stour Head, I can virtually see it from my window here right now, one of the largest Trust properties. It employs my constituents. My constituents are tenants of the Trust. Many of my constituents are volunteers with the Trust and members of the Trust. So we have a legitimate interest as parliamentarians in what goes on.
Are you a member of Restore Trust, this campaign group that's trying to bring about change from within the Trust?
No, I'm not actually. And again, I think, I would want to maintain some level of independence. I'm delighted to hear from all organisations that have an interest in the Trust, from Restore Trust, all the bodies that relate to land management, conservation. I'm more than happy to hear from them, but I would like to maintain some level of independence.
Will you take evidence from Trust executives? Hilary McGrady, for example, the Director General?
I hope very much Hilary comes and talks to us at the earliest convenience, and I have already written to her with that suggestion, so hopefully yes. And
she said in an interview with The Guardian that report, this colonialism and slavery report, was first stage research, and the next step was property by property to ask if they need to do more research on individual properties of those 93 mentioned with links to colonialism and slavery. Is that wise, do you think?
Well, I think I'm on the record as criticising the research that has been done because it doesn't seem to me to be particularly robust. Conflating colonialism and slavery, for a start, is strange. Chronologically, I think that needs to be challenged. I have no objection at all to good research. I encourage good research, but it has to be conducted objectively rather than be there simply to validate a conclusion that's already been drawn.
Do you feel any sympathy for them? I mean, if they had failed to do this audit, perhaps the left may have criticised them. I mean, it's very hard, the Trust. It's like the BBC, I think. It sits in the middle of our national consciousness, and it gets accused of being taken over by different groups at any point in its history, doesn't it?
Yes, I think so. I think entryism is always a problem, something we need to be alive to. Parliament really should be there to challenge that. The point about the Trust, it's one of our great mediating institutions, isn't it? It sits there, a great, huge monolith to do a particular task. It should be really careful, I think, about intruding into the political space. I wouldn't advise that. I think that degrades its primary purpose, which is to be the clerk of works for some of our great national treasures, and to provide a place, a safe space, if you like, for people to go to and refresh and renew. And goodness me, over the past 18 months, we've needed that as never before, haven't we?
And just finally, Andrew Murrison, do you think it's time there was some form of independent inquiry into the Trust and how it's run, its priorities and the rest of it?
Well, in the debate I hosted on the Trust about 18 months ago now, I did try to persuade the Minister that it would be timely to review the trust, as has happened before. I think the last time it was done formally by Parliament was the 1970s. I don't think he was attracted to the idea then. I have yet to discuss it with the new Secretary of State at DCMS. I'm sure she will be quite keen to perhaps think about it. So I think one of my tasks is to have a word with Nadine Dorries and say, is it time perhaps that we should have a look again, since we are responsible as parliamentarians to an extent for the trust. Since we set it up originally, it was set up by Parliament. I think it's legitimate for us, in the light of the fact we're in the 21st century, to have a bit of a refresh. I think that would be a good thing. So hopefully we'll have a look at that.
With Andrew Murrison, the Tory MP for South West Wiltshire, who's starting a bid to, help the National Trust with its issues at the moment. Thanks for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, that's it for this week, listeners. We've covered quite a lot of ground in this week's episode, so do please get in touch with your thoughts. You can email me, chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk, or tweet me. We're at Choppers Podcast. And if you're not following us on Twitter, why not? Thank you to my guests, Rosie Duffield MP, Johnny Leavesley, and of course Andrew Murrison MP there. Thank you to my producers, Giles Gear, Louisa Wells, and Theodora Luludis. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. As ever, when the MPs are sitting, I do write a daily newsletter on politics. Please sign up to that. I also bring more Westminster Whispers in my weekly Peterborough Diary column, online every Friday at 7 p.m, and in Saturday's paper. Details of both those are in the show notes of this episode. And of course, as ever, please do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph if you can. I know you won't regret it. Until next time though, cheerio!